Welcome to Sachs Realty's Tuesday Night Podcast, where we talk about anything and everything real estate. Each week, we deliver expert information enabling you to make better informed decisions while keeping more money in your pocket. If you're interested in real estate, this is your show. Hey guys, welcome to our Tuesday Night Podcast. We are live tonight as usual, and we have a real awesome show on tap tonight because we're talking about something that, affordable housing. I mean, it just doesn't exist in the country right now. I mean, there's so much happening, so much going on, and there needs to be some type of solution. And we're actually talking about something tonight it's nothing new. It really isn't. We're talking about accessory dwelling units. And for a lot of people, they think of accessory dwelling units like a in-laws quarters in a house. We're talking about single family houses in neighborhoods, communities. And there's a lot of legislation being passed right now. Tonight, we got a real special guest that is coming from a real expert point of view because he wrote a book on it, and we're going to get around to that. And then we also have tonight a builder and a contractor and a very good personal friend of mine. I'll go ahead right now and introduce Melissa to all of you. If you don't know who Melissa is, I mean, I can't imagine, but if this is your first time watching our Tuesday Night Podcast, welcome to our show. And sit back and Melissa, go ahead and let everybody know who you are.
Thank you. Thank you, Todd. Hi, everyone. Welcome to another Tuesday night. We are so excited because we're going to do a little bit of a different topic this evening. We know that housing is really in demand right now, and coming all the way from Portland, Oregon, we have Cole Peterson. Cole is the really the mind behind all of the ADU growth. We have a lot going on with strategizing and zoning and legislation, and Cole's going to get into all of that this evening. But Cole is from buildinganadu.com. Cole, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me.
Tell everybody a little bit about you, Cole. Go ahead.
Okay. So I live in Portland. I'm sitting in my ADU right here in Portland, Oregon, which is kind of like ground zero for ADU kind of policy innovation as of like 10 years ago. Now ADUs have become kind of a big thing, at least on the West Coast, and starting to become a bigger thing on the East Coast too. I wrote this book, Backdoor Revolution. I have a couple different websites about ADUs, and I run an ADUs designation for practitioners that we'll get to later. And I do a lot of policy and consulting work across the country, a lot of advocacy work. And I'm on the board of the Casita Coalition in California. So I do a lot of work with ADU work in California, which is really the biggest market for ADUs right now, Los Angeles in particular. Los Angeles produced like 10,000 ADUs last year alone. So they're kind of the leader in the whole world at this point with ADUs. So there's a lot of exciting things happening with ADUs, and but I'm very, very invested in getting ADUs to take off in the East Coast in particular. From the East Coast originally, and I think there's a lot of things the East Coast could do better. And so we'll get into that this hour, I hope. Would love to just field any questions that come up.
Yeah, and guys, we are live, so chat your comments in. And I'd like to introduce a personal friend of mine because it was kind of interesting. Chris and I, we go back. We've been like best buddies for a while, huh, Chris? I mean, you and me
for a long time.
Long time, yeah. And it's interesting because Chris we're both from a builder background. So Chris and I met. Actually, I was representing a piece of land, and he probably doesn't like when I tell this story, but it was kind of interesting because we didn't start out as friends, and it just kind of evolved. We actually, he probably, I don't know, Chris, you probably weren't very happy with me. We were doing a development, or you were doing the development, and yes, I was selling the property for my client. And anyway, it kind of went on and on and on and on. And Chris ended up losing a bunch of money. My client got the money, and Chris never did the deal. But as a result, he got me as a very good friend, and we kind of hang out. And I'm so honored to have him because it was interesting when I knew Chris and I have been talking about the housing problem. I mean, probably over my house, Chris. or over your house or both of our houses, you and I have strategized so much on, how do we bring affordable housing to, as builders, right? In a world where it just doesn't exist, so much red tape. And Chris has really hung out in this space a lot. About, I don't know, maybe 2 years ago, Chris had said something to me about this accessory dwelling legislation that was being presented in Maryland. It was in DC, and then it was in Maryland, and it started in Montgomery County, and it's kind of spreading. And I know now all the legislators want to bring it to every county in the city of Maryland because, we need affordable housing. And we're going to talk about some of the good and the bad that comes with having, accessory dwellings in neighborhoods or increasing density. But first, I want to kind of just lay some foundation. Chris is a builder. I've covered one of his builds on my show here. If you guys want to see some of the work that Chris does, we did a video on him building a modular building in Montgomery County, modular home. And it's a great video. You can check it out on Sachs Realty. But the reason, it was kind of interesting because Chris and I talked about this a couple of years ago, and I knew we were going to bring Cole on for the second time. And, probably, I don't know, not quite a year ago, Chris said to me, "Hey, Todd, you and I have been talking about accessory dwelling units, and I'm going to this convention in California to become certified because I know it's going to hit. I know it's going to be big. I know it's going to be a lot of opportunity for homeowners to take advantage of this because we know a lot of people are struggling, to pay their mortgages sometimes, excessive, bills are accumulating and, high cost of housing, and, taxes going up, insurance going up. And this is an opportunity for people to actually earn income, rent out, build and rent out an apartment in their house where it doesn't have to be a blood relative. So anyway, I couldn't go. I really wanted to, but Chris went, got a certification. And then when I asked him, when I knew we were going to do this show tonight, bring this to you guys, I said to Chris, "Hey, would you want to be on the show? I know this is something you're into now." And I said, "We're going to have this guy, Cole Peterson." He said, "What?" He said, "That's the guy that I went to California to be certified under." So, watching these two kind of unite again after, before the show, after this Cole's, convention. But anyway, Chris, welcome to the show. Tell everybody your version of.
Yeah, I'll tell you the version. It was like the Mike Tyson and Holyfield. I kind of wanted to bite his ear off, but I held back. No, we found out that we had a lot more in common than just doing real estate development. We lived kind of in the same community. We just became real good friends because not only did we have a lot of things in common in our business, but we had a lot of personal things in common. And as usual, when you have a lot of things that are in common, you could become friends. So in that regard, it was exciting to know someone that understands real estate, that understands, off the record in terms of friendship. So we just became close in that area. But I'm a builder in the Washington, D.C. metropolitan area. We call it the DMV. And my profession for the last 20 years have been doing custom homes. And I'm one that like to look into whatever I can look into in terms of construction. So we start off with custom homes, and then we went to modular homes, and we went from that to doing additions and different kind of additions. But if I would back up, I've known about ADU probably for the last 6 or 7 years, and I heard about Cole through someone else, and it was so exciting to me that I was actually ready to move to California because I know the legislation was getting ready to be approved for the entire state. So my cousin, who actually knows Cole also, is a builder in California. I believe my cousin went to one of his seminars in Portland, Oregon. But either way, it has been very exciting because there's so many opportunities in the ADU, and it's just mind blowing, from every aspect and for every way. It's just extremely exciting. Not only recognizing that there's a housing shortage, but when you think about the opportunities, if you're retired and how it can bring income to you, if you're a young couple and you want to do some things with real estate within your own parameters or your own yard or your own house. How exciting can that be? So I'm very excited about the ADUs. We are doing a massive marketing program this year. We've already started, and we plan on doing a lot of exciting things, getting the word out about ADUs in the Washington, D.C. metropolitan area, and quite frankly, all over the East Coast.
Well, we welcome you to the show, and I guess we'll start off with Cole here because I'd like to know, Cole, like, what is kind of the history of accessory dwelling units? Kind of what take us back. I mean, how did this begin and where?
Okay, this is a funny answer, but it started off at the inception of humankind. We've always been living in multi-generational households. And it's really only, in the 1950s and 60s that the U.S. Started to ban the allowance of ADU type of or multifamily, kind of zoning within areas that you can develop land. Everywhere in the world, except for the United States and Canada and Australia, allows for you to build multiple housing units on properties that you own. It's really just the US that, for whatever reason, for a number of reasons that we can go into, starting in 1926, came up with a type of zoning typology called Euclidean zoning, which separates single-family residential zoning from multifamily zoning, from commercial zoning. And starting at that time, over the course of the following decades, the US, as it was developing rapidly with population growth, started to designate more or allocate more and more land under exclusive single-family residential type of development. And so this is a very it's an aberration from the thousands of years of time that humans have existed, and it's an aberration from the rest of the world. We solely and uniquely have this exclusive single-family residential property zoning typology that's exploded and become almost, I would say, almost like a disease that we all think of as the norm, but it's really an aberration from the norm. And so ADUs are a way to kind of get back to giving people the ability to do what they want with their own land, which is a natural thing that people want to do, is provide housing for other people that they are in their family, or to provide them with a source of income, or to do any number of things. So in a nutshell, that's kind of the history of ADUs. We can go a lot more into that, but I'll stop there.
I had read that in San Francisco back in, around the time of World War II, they had a real boom of defense jobs, and a lot of the defense workforce was in San Francisco. And, there were, I think, like 20 to 30,000 of these ADUs built. And most of them were illegal, right? And, they would just build them. And, and then they really started cracking down back then on, sort of prohibiting these ADUs. And I guess at some point they started to be, at what point was it okay for because in-law suites are very popular, right? But you had to be blood related, right? It had to be family, and but at what point, I guess, did we start to see where we had a boom of illegal accessory dwelling units? And I still think that happens today. I think there are a lot of houses where the owners illegally put apartments in their home. I don't know, I would police that, but, now they're trying to crack down where, everybody has to have a rental license. But at what point did the actual in-law suite become a thing, and, where it was okay to get a legal permit, a legal use for that, but not just for a non-blood relative?
Yeah, so in-law unit is kind of an informal term. It's not a legal term of art. But as you said, people really, there's such an intrinsic human need for having the ability for a mom or an uncle or a adult relative to live in your house, but you don't necessarily want to share the same kitchen with that person. That people have been doing this and have done it forever, and they will continue to do it forever, no matter what the rules and regulations say. They don't know what the rules and regulations are, and they're just going to like build a kitchen in a part of their house because they have an aging parent who can't go from the lower level to the upper level. And why would they want to make them do that? So they put in this kitchen in their basement, and all of a sudden they have effectively an ADU, but it's not a legal permitted ADU. And that would be informally called a in-law unit. Now, because this is such a natural thing for people to do, as you said, there are tens of thousands of these in DC, in Boston, San Francisco, LA, all the major cities, in Chicago. They're not permitted as legal permitted ADUs, but they're out there. And that is, in my mind, the most foolproof evidence that we have that there's an inherent need for this, that people, even without the legal ability to do this, are doing it anyway because they have to. And so, as an advocacy matter, that's one of the reasons, that's one of the points I bring up. Like, if you don't have really good, government, if you don't have really good ADU codes, people are just going to be building these things illegally because they have been doing this for decades. And it's in your interest, government, to have good regulations for ADUs, because then people can at least do it legally and safely, and you, government, can receive, tax revenue from the additional habitable legal rental units that are there. But yeah, there's a lot of informal ADUs, and really the informal development of ADUs would have started to occur at the same time that they were being stamped out by jurisdictions starting in the 40s, 50s, 60s. And then by and large, there wasn't really anywhere in the country that was allowing ADUs by right by the 80s and 90s. And so it's really becoming a resurgence right now of a new movement, because we're rediscovering the need for this. We're as an academic matter, we're discovering it as a practical economic matter, we're rediscovering it. And so a lot of my work has been kind of daylighting the regulatory barriers that are out there that are just, we don't even see them on the East Coast. Like you said, earlier, most communities have owner occupancy requirements, right? I'm actually, no, where we are seeing legal permanent ADUs, that you cannot have owner occupancy requirements. We'll get into owner occupancy requirements.
Yeah, we'll get into that, man. That's a whole nother story. Yeah. I don't want to go down that rabbit trail yet. But Cole, I mean, what do you think? Why? What is the government's hang up with this? I mean, I know, as it was happening, post World War II, especially. I mean, I know in Baltimore, it's tons of them. But what we're really talking about was, I think. A lot of people in rural areas were starting to make these too, but what was the reason? And I know, when they broke this up and said, look, we need to put zoning regulations in place so that this prevents somebody that has some land, has a single family house. We need to stop them from putting an apartment, we'll call it an apartment, in their house, a rental unit in their house. We're going to prevent this. And, I know they then started to do more, urban style designs. They knew people, that there had to be higher density, but then they went about it a completely different way. But why do you think it is that the government stepped in and said, you're not allowed, your home, your house, you own it, well, you're paying on it, but why is it that the government stepped in and said, you can't just make an apartment in your house?
It's a great question. I mean, it's a cultural kind of legacy baggage from the notion that renters are, not good people. You don't want renters living in your nice single family neighborhood. And it's not it's really just probably a reaction to that cultural perception. So the government didn't push for that as much as respond to kind of a series of trends that were reinforcing the nature of a bias, an institutional bias towards single family residential development, and that bias comes out comes through in codes such as, only one household may live on a single residential property, and so that code is still in effect in a lot of the East Coast, where you can only have one household that's related by blood. You can only have blood adoption or some other kind of thing, but you can't even have two people who are unrelated living together in a single family house. Is that enforced? Probably not. But that's like that kind of institutional bias towards single, nuclear households is still like embedded in our laws and regulations, and it's a holdover from the 1920s, 1950s, and it all stems from kind of a fear of multifamily or renters, or somehow kind of thinking that the pristine nuclear family household must have a protected form of zoning that wouldn't allow for commercial applications, wouldn't allow for multifamily apartments, God forbid. In fact, in the Euclidean, in the zoning case of 1926, Euclid v. Ambler, which is what established the zoning patterns that we have today, they called multifamily apartments like the voice of the finding, or the judicial, whatever, the law said that multifamily apartments were like parasites on single family zones, and that we should not allow for multifamily development in single family zones. And that was kind of like the line and the ethos that precipitated and spawned the many jurisdictions or states kind of enabling jurisdictions to put into place the separation of single family from multifamily, which wasn't really the intent. That whole Euclid v. Ambler case was, in my opinion, I'm not a lawyer or an attorney, but I think it was a misinterpretation of what that Supreme Court finding was. It actually explicitly talked about single family and duplexes are fine, but we don't want huge apartment buildings in the same zone as single family. And to some extent, I can kind of understand that. But interestingly, somehow that nuance was misunderstood. And now, it's now just single family or bust. It's single family, but we don't want anything else. We don't want duplexes. We don't want triplexes. We don't want fourplexes. We don't want single family homes with ADUs. We don't want sixplexes. Those are all in the same category as multifamily, which, those don't belong in single family neighborhoods, which are for nuclear family households. But somehow that misinterpretation got, embedded into the zoning code, and that's what we're living with today. We're living with a misinterpretation of that Supreme Court finding from 1926, and it's just now 100 years later that cities are starting to wake up to the fact that, oh my gosh, we actually really need to have more housing within this type of zoning that is now the prominent, dominant form of zoning that we have. Most cities are 75% single family residentially zoned in the United States, like 75% of the land area. So if we only allow for that one housing type, single family zone, single family homes without ADUs or duplexes or triplexes, we are really vastly limiting the type of or the amount of housing we can put. And so we're effectively requiring cities to sprawl outwards, which is requiring people to spend a lot more time in their vehicles, to go from point A to point B, to drop off their kids, to go shopping, to go to school, to go to hospitals, to go to work. And so it's forcing us to spend time in our automobiles, and it's forcing us to spend a lot of money on gas. It's forcing us to be really energy inefficient, put a lot of money into the development of roads, infrastructure, to maintain that infrastructure. It's a disease. And I think ADUs are a way to kind of reintroduce the notion that, hey, it's not so bad to have a rental unit on your property. And in fact, it should be a right as a property owner for you to do what is naturally what you're predisposed to do. And furthermore, this bridges into this conversation of middle housing, which is equally, important. But I think, ADUs are a really good stepping stone because they're not as threatening. Because as you can see in these pictures, ADUs are kind of diminutive, small structures that sometimes you don't even see from the road. You can drive by them and not even know they're there. This ADU on the right here is like 220 square feet. It's really small. This is a picture right in front of it, but if you were in the street, you wouldn't even see it. And this ADU would rent out for like $1,200 in Portland. So $1,200 is a lot of money to pay for a 200 square foot apartment, but the primary house in front of it would rent out for $2,200. So it's the most affordable housing unit you can rent in a single family residential neighborhood, because other single family homes are all 3-bedroom, 4-bedroom homes. Now that would be fine if we had a whole bunch of nuclear family households in the United States, but that's not actually a household type that we really have anymore. 2/3 of the country lives in 1- and 2-person households. So we still have this like holdover zoning that is forcing people to build single family homes, which isn't a household type that is really the dominant household type anymore. That's a household type that we had dominating the country in 1950, but that's not the household type we have dominating in 2023.
Yeah, I wish we had more of the houses that were built in the 40s and 50s, because they were actually affordable housing. And, they were, 1,200, 1,400, 1,500 square feet, 3-bedroom, 1 bath, affordable. A lot of that is post World War II, when the government actually reduced the amount of red tape for developers like Chris to be able to go in and actually, build affordable housing. I mean, I think it's, the regulation, but I want to kind of I want to talk to Chris about this, because, Cole, you said so much about, first of all, I get it, right? Everybody wants affordable housing, but not in their neighborhood, right? That's the big issue, right? And you said, you kind of, you said it, it stigmatizes the community of putting a lower income, family into these single, not right. But that has been the topic, right? Oh my gosh, we can't have a renter in this community. We can't have a neighborhood of renters but two things, and I know we're going to disagree on this and respectfully disagree. But I believe that if you have, or that you limit ADUs to owner occupied housing, and I know we're going to have this discussion because you don't agree with that, and that's fine. But, I think we've got to be careful here, because if we turn the communities and the neighborhoods into truly investor-owned multifamily housing by right, that's a problem in itself, in my opinion. But if you have an owner-occupied, my thought is, if you have an owner that's paying the mortgage and they own the house and they want to build an accessory dwelling unit and help subsidize and pay and allow for somebody to come into that neighborhood as a rental to where they would not be able to otherwise be there, you're going to have less problems, in my opinion, with an owner occupant and one of the two units than you are having 2 rental units in the same dwelling. But before we go down that path, because I know, we can respectfully, argue that fact. But Chris, I want to ask you, because you're diving into this and you're wanting to do this for a reason. And I know, because I know you, it's not about the money with you. I know you, I know your heart. We've had many late night talks, lots of dinners, we know each other, right? And I know that there's something about this that means more than just the money to you. What does it mean to you in making it possible to have accessory dwelling units in suburbia, in a lot of these communities where we don't have high density?
It makes all the difference in the world, Todd. And what's passionate about it, and as Cole has mentioned, there's a housing shortage, and we are in a unique time right now where we can do something about that. And there's never been a time where just regular people could be in a position to help other people. And especially in major cities like Washington, D.C., Chicago, and New York City, it is extremely expensive for a one-bedroom apartment. I mean, and take, for instance, Washington, D.C., for an efficiency, downtown Washington, D.C. is $2,300 a month. So efficiency is not even one room, and you're paying that kind of money. And you have people that the income is not to a point where they're able to pay that. Whether it's the efficiency or one bedroom, two bedroom, it's just very difficult to do that. So what's passionate for me is that it's a variety of an opportunity for the homeowner, an opportunity for the person who was interested in renting. Most of the time, your college graduates just come out of law school and they're interested in getting their jobs in a local area, or perhaps in Washington, D.C., where you have a lot of government opportunities, and they don't have nowhere to live, unless they move 30 or 40 miles out and then, drive to work and deal with the traffic and things of that nature. And so here we have an opportunity to where you're able to come to a place, whether it's residential or the inner city or in the suburbia, wherever it is, and they can actually, have a place of abode there, have their own kitchen, have their own bathroom, have a nice place to stay for a reasonable amount of money. So when you look at it, I look at it in terms of being able to have a win-win for everybody, win-win for the homeowner, win-win for a person that's investing. And then, quite frankly, the government needs help. The government needs help from the standpoint that they need someone to point out, how can we help this housing shortage? I mean, what can we do? And I think Cole pointed out, governments are now having what we call an aha moment, and so that aha moment is that, hey, we have opportunity where, there's some property in the back of a single family home that can be utilized for, obviously, someone that needs housing. So from that perspective, that's what has spun this whole thing out to do it. And Todd, it can go either way. And I can say I can agree with the both of you, because this is an opportunity for homeowners to participate in this, I call new wealth, as it relates to ADUs. Because, let's face it, once you're past, 65 or 70 and you're retiring right now, we don't really know what kind of income that they're going to be getting in. And so here's an opportunity that they'll be able to not only have a position where someone can rent the home, but to be able to have some sort of income to subsidize, what's coming into the household. So I'm not saying everybody will want to do something like that, but there's a certain percentage of people that will and that want to do that. And there's also a certain percentage. I mean, when you think about healthcare and we think about senior care, how much does it cost for a senior to stay in a assisted living home? It could be between $8,000 to $10,000 a month, and they can be right on the property where their children are and can stay right there. And so it's just so many different opportunities when it comes with the ADU. So there's a lot of passion coming from myself and Nehemiah Construction, and we want to be one of the first in our area to launch the ADU in our marketing campaign as it relates for individual homeowners, and also for the one who have a heart to say, hey, instead of just buying a house and flipping it and getting rid of it, they can buy a house and put an ADU on it, and perhaps they can rent that out. But there's some factual things that you were saying, Todd, earlier, in terms of the community and what you just don't want to one of these landlords that don't care about it and take the community down. So that's a consideration. But at the same time, if a person really has a heart to say, hey, you know what, I want to be able to participate in this, but I'm going to be true in terms of making sure that we won't get, just any kind of a renter or things of that nature. So that can go either way, dealing with that. But I think it's just a win-win for everybody involved.
I think of this, Chris, and, look, man, I think of it as, the locks on a deep out the honest people. That's the way I think about it, right? I mean, we don't need to protect the investors, right? Because the investors are going to do whatever the heck they want to do anyway. I mean, how many times do I have investors that are like, I want to buy this 3-unit dwelling, and then the first thing I have to do as a real estate broker is I have to say, well, let's find out if it's illegal, not illegal, a legal 3-unit. And 99 times out of 100, it's not. So somebody went in there, an investor went in, they've turned it into a multifamily, whatever, and now they're going to sell it. And the investor's like, I don't care, I want to buy it anyway. It's set up. And it's like, well, you're not going to be able to get rental, make it a legal, rental. And they're like, they don't care. And a lot of you say the government had an aha moment. I think the only aha moment that the government has is how can they make more money off of something like this, right? Because they're not doing it out of the goodness of their hearts. If they had, we'd have had plenty of aha moments since 1940s when they started restricting these things, right? But the thing of the matter is that, I think that, if we're looking at these things and we're going, look, the only way to make sure that we're not slumlording in America is to make sure that there's regulation and that it is available, right? That we can actually do things right, to encourage to have things done right. Because if they're investors are just going to do whatever they want anyway. So I think this is more of the locks on the door for honest people, not thieves. The locks on the door for honest people, that if we can pass this legislation and limit it to the homeowners that are allowed to do this, I say we write it in the deed, a deed restriction like anything else that says that the accessory dwelling unit can only be used by an owner occupant. And should they sell that property to an LLC or a company, it gets squashed and it has to be converted back. But anyway, but that's, kind of like not giving you the opportunity, Cole, to defend that. But before, and just kind of going into that, let's pretend like the government is having an aha moment. We'll sit that aside for a minute and they're going, aha, oh man, oh my gosh, we got an affordable housing crisis on our hands. Hello, surprise, right? Okay, so they realize it. They're having an aha moment that now, finally, they let housing run up 40% in 2 years. They dropped the interest rates to zero to make everybody rich, except the people that are trying to buy the houses, they're poor, right? But now we have an aha moment. But sliding that aside for a minute, I'm just kind of curious, Cole, who's lobbying for this?
Who's lobbying for ADUs?
Yes, and besides you, because I know you're doing it, you've been interested in this for a long time, and you, like Chris, I know your heart is good. You want to help people. I get it. But look, I would love to say Cole Peterson in his book and his efforts and his seminars and all that stuff, I'd love to say, man, you are killing it and you're making the change. But I want to know who's lobbying to change these laws.
Actually, the biggest lobbyist for ADUs is the biggest organization in the world, and that is AARP. AARP is the largest member organization in the world, and they've now become the strongest lobbyist for ADUs. And it's really become like a huge issue for them, and they are working everywhere in every state, and well, maybe not every state, but most states. They are working on legislation behind the scenes, and if not statewide legislation, they're working with jurisdictions that are open to looking at ADU regulations. So they're working up and down the East Coast, and so I work directly with them as a technical consultant on ADU related matters, but they, independent of me, are really kind of doing a huge service for ADUs right now. And a lot of people are said, when they hear that, they're like, what does AARP have to do with ADUs? Well, it's a good question, but if you think about it, right now, if you are an aging person and you are facing either the option of assisted living, where it's going to cost $12,000 a month, or you can live in your neighborhood and put money into an ADU, you could build yourself a house, stay in your community. You could build an ADU that's accessible, a one-story ADU, no threshold entry, no threshold shower, for say $200,000. And in a course of 2 years, you would have spent all that money on assisted living, and now you have a house in the backyard. You can rent out the primary house, and so that's one reason. You can make an accessible house. You can stay in your community. You can create a more, you can be surrounded by the people you've always lived with. So it's really kind of fulfilling the mission for, it's providing multi-generational household opportunities for people who want to age in place to have their family live with them. So there's all these really good reasons why AARP would support ADUs. And so they have a statewide model ordinance now, and also a jurisdictional ordinance, like model ordinance. And so a lot of cities are now looking to that model ordinance that was passed by AER, or that was guidance that's now available on AERP's website, and they're utilizing that as the model. And so that's kind of, they're probably the number one advocate for ADUs at this point, nationally.
Yeah. Anybody else that comes to mind? I mean, I didn't know that.
So AARP is the biggest one by far. The next one is the White House, and Housing and Urban Development are now kind of really pushing hard on ADUs on a financing level. So that's a powerful ally. Unfortunately, or fortunately or unfortunately, the White House has the federal government has zero control over zoning. That's really something that they've put into the hands of states. States in turn passed over that authority to jurisdictions. They don't have to do that, but they have. And so that is how we think about zoning reform in the United States. It's a local matter, but it's really a state matter. And that's why states like California, Oregon, Washington, Montana, Virginia, Connecticut have now all passed statewide legislation that's kind of the next frontier of how to get good ADU reform in effect, because instead of having to change codes 1,000 times, you can just change it one time and have it apply to the whole state. So that's something I'm really interested in. So having the White House and HUD kind of support reform on a financing level for Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac and other GSEs is a pretty impressive thing. We should talk a little bit about some of the changes that HUD has just put into effect, or Federal Housing Administration has just put into effect for their 203K loan at some point. But there's a lot of kind of reform happening at that level. And then aside from that, depending on the region that you're in, sometimes realtor associations are in favor of ADUs. Sometimes they're very against ADUs. Sometimes home builders associations are really in favor of ADUs. Sometimes they're really against ADUs. I wish I could say, all green organizations, like environmental organizations, were in favor of ADUs, but they can also go both ways. So it kind of depends on the region and the different players involved. But in general, AARP is kind of the reliable kind of entity that anybody in the country can go to and hope and find an ally to help push legislative issues.
I know, Cole, and Chris, I want to ask you a question about some community impact with having more accessory dwelling units or increasing the density in neighborhoods. But Cole, I know HUD, they actually had a study performed, right, where it was like 5 or 6 states or something that they actually. Do you know about that? Have you heard about that? They actually they had a study. I think it was somewhere in Massachusetts and Virginia. I don't know. We could probably pull it up, but Joe, if you want to look for it. But there was actually a study that was done that HUD sponsored, and they came back with a lot of very interesting, analysis and collected a lot of data. And especially with the counties or the areas where they had approved them, right? And they came up with a lot. And I can't imagine. I could think of so many. And Chris will let you talk about it here for a minute, and then we'll take some comments and questions. But Chris, get off the top of your head? I mean, if you had to sell this, right? You sell the like Cole is, advocating for it. If you had to go in and advocate for ADUs, there you go. There's accessory dwelling units case study. And let's scroll down a little bit and look at the states that it was involved. You got to keep going. You would expect something to pop up, but it doesn't. There's just a lot of, blank space on it. Keep going. See, there you go. All right. So these are the areas where, I don't know, there we go. Lexington, Mass, Santa Cruz, California. Go ahead. Keep going. Scroll down. Portland, Oregon. All right. Yeah, Barnstable, Massachusetts. Looks like a lot in Massachusetts. So yeah. Anyway, you guys can check it out. We'll actually let's just drop that link into the show notes. People can read about it. But there was a lot of interesting things. But before I want to say what they came up with, Chris, what kind of community? What good things do you have? And look, and I know you said DC, but I don't want to focus on those areas because I know there's already a lot of illegal dwelling units in DC. There's already a lot of illegal in Baltimore. I mean, I can pick at least the cities that I'm familiar with, and I know that there are a lot of houses or row houses that have 2 units in them already. Some of them even 3 units, and they're illegal, but they have them. But if you had to say, in full Maryland, for instance, an area that you're very familiar with, right? Where you have a lot of, rural, 4-acre, 5-acre parcels, big houses. What would you sell to a legislator? How would you say, guys, you should pass this? These are some of the positive things that would impact the community.
Well, that's pretty simple. And Cole's kind of alluded to it, that the biggest supporter behind this was AARP. Seniors need housing. And when you think about, just give us a scenario, someone has worked hard and they're retired, they're 75 years old, they have failing health, and you go and you're going to need some sort of assistance. And Cole was right. It's $12,000 a month. Yeah, we're not talking
right, but
about
we're talking about the tenants.
Yeah.
I'm not talking about the tenants. I'm talking about the community impact, the positive. What would some of the positive community impacts be?
Well, outside of me saying that and talk about the seniors, the positive thing is that, I think community involvement is very important. And so the way I view community involvement is being able to help and to be able to understand, what this community is doing. So it's no difference where in the town I live in Columbia, Maryland, they have a lot of things that, that are for seniors. And that's just not by happenstance. They set the whole community up where that will increase and help the community itself, and saying that we care about our residents. We care about the people that are coming and staying here. And oftentimes, maybe not in Columbia area or Fulton area, but oftentimes there are not other things that people can do, whether it's seniors or whether it's people that are just starting off. They want to be able, the community want to be able to support the reality of what's going on today. And the reality is going on today is that we need to have young people being involved. And when you think about the kind of money that they could save, got one thing you're talking about, the student loans, but my goodness, they need to have a place where they can enjoy their home and not pay $4,000 or $5,000 a month. And so if you're asking me, what can I look at? What can we say about how is this a community involvement? Well, that is a community involvement. That is saying that we understand that there is a housing shortage. That is saying that, hey, we care about this. Our community care about these residents that can't find housing. They can't go to places and have things to go to without having to, spend so much money. So from that perspective, it we're dealing with money, but we're also dealing with the thing that everyone cannot afford these large amount of money that these big developers are charging. And so if anything, let's help America. Let's get involved and say, hey, you know what? We have something to offer. You work hard. You do a lot of great things. You don't have to pay $3,000 a month, and you can stay here because Aunt Susie down the street also needs the help. And not only that, you can have your own place, have your own privacy, and have the community support that around there by just having recreation, having little small concerts or whatever's in the area. So that is a big pull. And it's not just about the people that are coming in there as a renter, but we're talking about ownership and we're talking about community.
Melissa, let's take some questions.
Okay. We're going to start here with this one with Christina C96. Thank you so much for your question. Ultimately, will permitted ADUs add additional property taxes to the single-family residence, especially in Los Angeles, where property taxes are already so expensive? Is there any ROI? Cole? What's the answer to that?
Yeah. So the answer to the question is actually, yeah. So definitely any work that you ever do to improve your property for which you pull permits, which would definitely include an ADU, would definitely impact your taxes. Just like if you add an addition or a pool or a deck or anything else to your property, it'll add to your property taxes, and it should, or it, that's just how things work. Now, interestingly, California and Oregon both have like a property tax cap increase. It only goes up so much per year, and that is maybe a good thing, maybe a bad thing. But when you do permitted work, that is an exception to that. So the cap doesn't apply to any new improvements that you do. So the ADU would be taxed at like a 1% rate. So a $200,000 ADU might add like $2,000 of tax burden per year in California, which is, about how in Los Angeles, that's less than you would be able to rent out an ADU for. An ADU in LA would rent out for anywhere from like $2,000 to $3,000 a month, I'm guessing. And as I mentioned before, LA is kind of the biggest market in the country right now for ADUs in the world. In fact, it's like 21,000 permitted ADUs have gone in the last 3 years, which is really blowing the scale of the potential of ADUs, in a big way. And it's kind of become a national story for all the jurisdictions that are not able to get above like 10 ADUs per year because their codes are so bad. To your question about ROI, yes, absolutely. There's a good ROI. Only ADUs are only going to take off in communities where they would have a good ROI. And that would be places like Los Angeles, the Bay Area, Seattle, Portland. Any major city where there's a housing crisis is where ADUs would be built. They will not be built in Detroit, no matter how good the code is in Detroit, because you can buy the house next door for less than you could build an ADU. They're only going to be built in areas where the land value is high enough that getting that free dirt is really critical to the formula to develop. If you can get dirt for free, then ADUs will not be built. If you have to pay $500,000 for a piece of dirt, then ADUs will be built.
There is a follow-up question here talking about value of homes. We have Crime Stoppers. Does an ADU increase or decrease the value of a single family dwelling? Your thoughts on that one?
It definitely increases the value. The big question is, how much does it increase the value? And there is no formulaic way to answer this, unfortunately. I wish there were. As a general matter, what I say is you can finger in the wind guess, say that ADUs will add about 50% of what they cost to construct. So if it costs $200,000 to build an ADU, it might add about $100,000 of contributory value to the resale value of the property. You might say to yourself, that's a bad investment. And you're right. If you were trying to sell that property the next day after you built an ADU, you would go out of business building an ADU and selling that property. And that is why we do not see speculative developers buying a single family house, building an ADU and selling it, because they would go out of business. The only people for whom it would make rational sense to build an ADU are people who are going to be holding on to that property for a period of time. And they're going to be renting that ADU out. If the longer you hold on to it, the more lucrative it is. So, for example, that $200,000 ADU adds $100,000 of resale value. If you sold it on day one in the first year, you would go out of business. You would lose your shirt. If you hold on to that ADU for 10 years and you're renting it out at $2,000 a month, that's $24,000 a year. All of a sudden, that's $240,000 of income that you would be generating over the next 10 years. So you would be making, you would have, gone out of pocket $200,000, but you could sell that property for $100,000 more. Plus, you've made $240,000 in the interim, and that formula just applies longer and longer. So in this ADU that I'm sitting in right now, it paid it for itself in 4 years, and every year subsequent to that I hold on to this property, it's just kind of a passive income cash cow. And so it's a very lucrative proposition for a homeowner to build an ADU, but only if you're holding on to that property. So to that comment about the contributory value, it's also notable that pretty much actually I would defer to others on this call, but when you talk about improvements that you can make to your house to add to the resale value, there's not many improvements that you can make that would add as much value as they cost to construct. Sometimes doing some landscaping on your front, to increase the curb appeal is like, potentially a good idea. But like, if you're going to do some internal, improvements to your house, those oftentimes don't add as much value as they cost to do. And so ADUs are the same with that.
How about making modifications to a home? We had Maria P ask a question. Can you flip 2 side-by-side garages into an ADU? And how expensive? Did you need a certain lot size to do that? And can you give us the basics of your state, city?
So yeah, it's going to vary entirely depending on the jurisdiction. So you have to Google, so let's say you're in Baltimore, you say Baltimore, Maryland, ADU regulations, look up the codes and figure out whether you can do it. Now in Portland, you can build 2 ADUs. In all of California, you can build 2 ADUs. In Washington, you can build 2 ADUs. That's not the case in the vast majority of the country. In most of the country where you can build an ADU, you can just build 1. But more and more, cities are looking at allowing 2 ADUs because that's kind of the next frontier. And so doing garage conversions and basement conversions and other internal conversions is the least expensive way to do an ADU. And that's what I would typically recommend for people who are interested in doing ADUs on the cheap, is to find a house where there's a structure or space in the house that can be converted to an ADU. If it's finished habitable space, it'll be less expensive. If it's a non-habitable space like a garage or a basement, and you convert that, that'll be like half the cost of new construction. New construction will be the most expensive, whether that's to say new standalone detached construction. Lot sizes, you're going to need a minimum lot size depending on the jurisdiction. Like in Portland, there's no minimum lot size requirements, but in a lot of jurisdictions, like where the codes are bad, you have a minimum lot size. And if they're really bad, it's going to say you need an acre to build an ADU, and that's going to kill ADUs out of the gate. So it's going to vary a lot by jurisdiction. So there's a lot of like what I call poison pills and codes out there. And among them are lot sizes.
I'd just like to interject here too, because see, this is what I'm afraid of when we start getting carried away with accessory dwelling units, right? Because for me, as a real estate broker, and actually from being a builder and a developer, I think about the community impacts in a negative way, or things that add costs to infrastructure. Because if in order for this thing to work, it has to be affordable for the homeowner. So I think we need to take this from a standpoint. You have a single family house. You have somebody that has room. We're talking about, 2 people living in a house, whatever. A garage conversion, a second floor conversion, a basement conversion. I'm all about there being 1 unit, and that's it. Not 2, not 3, whatever. And I'll tell you why. Because we're going to start to make these homeowners be responsible for upgrading the streets. Because here's the problem. You've got water and sewer supplying homes, right? When they put this infrastructure in back whenever it was built, it was designed for however many single family houses or, people density that you have living there, right? You're adding people, you're putting more demand on water requirements. We have, fire suppression now. We're installing in houses, sprinkler systems and things like that. And, adding these things, adding a detached garage or a structure to the building or whatever. I've seen it where I've even renovated a house. And Chris, I don't know, you may have gone through this too, but you have to do a flow test. Yeah. And, it was now on my, if it didn't meet the flow test, if we had to change the yoke coming in off the street for the water main, I had to spend $10,000, $20,000, $50,000 upgrading a street in order to get enough flow to my house that I'm building to meet current codes or building requirements, right? So, I think that we got to be careful we don't get carried away with this thing, and this thing start to really backfire on us from becoming a true problem of why people want a single family community, right? I can see where we could take this thing, and that's what I'm afraid of. You give an inch, and we're going to take a mile. You let them do something, and they're going to take it over. I mean, Chris, Chris, you know as well as I do, there are a lot of illegal apartments and houses.
Yes, yes,
100%.
Yes, there is. But the interesting thing that we have to all consider and think about is that moving forward, you do have, and I like what Cole said, what they call a permitted ADU. And the things that you're mentioning about water suppression and the sprinkler systems, those things are required now. And so there are things that you have to do moving forward. One interesting thing, I think, Todd, you're aware of this now, and I think this kind of happened when we had the fall back in 2007, 2008, where a lot of people were having all kinds of different things in their house, but you no longer can get that credit for a finished basement or anything in there if a permit was never pulled. So a lot of times when people go and try to sell these, especially this day and time, and it doesn't show that you had a finished basement or you had an apartment or whatever back in the back, you don't get any credit for that. So in terms of your appraisal, so and that's one of the things that's moving forward. Now, I'm sure a smart buyer will say, "Hey, I don't care about that. I'm going to go ahead and buy it anyway." Well, that's unto that person. But the bad thing about that is that if that building, for whatever reason, structurally fails, I don't know who's going to hold the ball on that one, because it certainly didn't get inspected and it wasn't permitted anyway. So there are a lot of negative things that comes out of things when you don't get it permitted. And if it's illegal, it's just like anything else is illegal. And you won't find out until something unfortunately happens in a negative way. But moving forward, in terms of the jurisdiction saying it's okay to do this, you're going to have to do this the right way. You have to get a permit the right way. You have to do these things as it relate to sprinkler systems or what have you. That's what I'm going through right now in Washington, D.C. We are going to have to go into the street and get it from a 3/4 to go to 1.5 inch line, because we're going to have it sprinkled. But those are the costs, the things of consideration. But it's still a good idea to be able to have an ADU, because you have documents that says, hey, that this has been inspected, this is good, this is a solid house, this is a solid place, you can move forward with that. But just say, for instance, as we've seen here, a lot of us can't believe it, but when you see whole entire buildings collapse and things that happen, something went wrong, and those were permitted. But just imagine when people were just building things and didn't understand, about soil, about compaction of soil and what can happen on a shift, and how buildings can collapse because you didn't have the right structural things in place. So we want to get away from the illegal parts. Nothing that we can do about it. I mean, that's why it's illegal. I mean, whatever you do, it's being done in the dark. So, we don't have a police to go in and say what's illegal and what's not. But I will tell you that if they see something being built right now and they pull up an address, an inspector can shut it down and give you a pretty hefty fine for doing so right now. So, I like to be focused on moving forward into things and making sure that whatever was done in the past was done in the past. There's no way that we can go around and do that unless it'll take a great deal amount of money in order to do something like that, to go and find out what was permitted and what wasn't permitted. But moving forward, I think by you being able to have the documents, by you being able to know that it's been done structurally sound and that it's been inspected, I think that's moving forward now. That's going to be the best thing that could ever happen with the ADU.
So, Chris, do you think you should be able to take a single family house and make it a 3-unit?
No, I don't agree with that. I personally don't agree with that. Now, everybody's situation is different, but I'll speak to that, Todd, from the perspective that you were in terms of the owner occupied. It's really just to say that, hey, I have a piece of property. I can put a house here. I can be able to offer it to someone that can, that can afford to pay, this rent would be a lot cheaper than an apartment. Or if I wanted to, be nice and do Airbnb sometimes, whatever you wanted to do with that homeowner has the right to do that. But when you get into more than one building on a property, it can go a lot of different ways. And I'm sure, moving forward, that would be considered in certain areas, in certain communities in that way. But I certainly understand, Todd, what you're saying in terms of not it being regulated at all, and how certain things can go on. But I think with an equal medium, so to speak, and see how we can make this work collectively, because one day we're all going to get old, and some people won't be able to afford $20,000 a month to be able to stay somewhere. It's what I would consider a blessing for anyone that have raised kids and they went out and the parents have gotten older now, and then perhaps they might not want them living in the house, but they can have a ADU, and a nurse can come back there and take care of their parent. So it's a lot of positive things that comes behind that, and you're really doing some things in community that we really need, because our seniors go through a lot. Even when you go to these places these assisted living places, sometimes they're horrific. They're awful. They don't care about the person, And so it's a lot of positive things that comes out of ADUs, and I support it 100%. And we're spending a lot of money for the marketing, the advertising, and what we plan on doing for this year, and certainly for 2024. We are launched and ready in the position to move forward.
No, I totally agree with it too. I think that you should be able to. I think that it will eliminate a lot of, if you can have it, then you will cut out a lot of the illegal, units that we see being constructed, and we'll make sure that
Exactly.
the life and safety elements are there, that and holding the homeowner to these higher standards to make sure that it's a safe place to live. And I agree with that 100%, but I do think that we should preserve the single family look and feel of the community. And I think that we need to be very careful when we do that, because, if this is going to be done and, sort of have as little opposition as possible, we have to, from an architectural standpoint, preserve the fact that parking needs to be a consideration. You can't just have people parking in the streets, and a house that has a huge amount of cars sitting out front of it. I think that we need to make sure that, and I think a lot of these areas that have approved it say that you can't have the accessory dwelling unit accessible from another outside entrance. There has to be some kind of a foyer in the house, to where it's kind of hidden, and it preserves, they go in the front door and then they can go off to the left or the right or whatever to get to the unit. But anyway, so yeah, let's take a couple more questions. I mean, it's a fiery hot topic. I went to, a lot of people were not crazy about Dr. Carson being, the Secretary of HUD, because they were saying, he didn't have, a lot of people said he didn't have a lot of the qualifications, and he went in and he cut a lot of regulations and, a lot of funding to things. And, there were a lot of people that were upset. But I had an opportunity, and Chris, I don't know if you were at that, our mutual friend had, orchestrated the event, but I had an opportunity to sit down, talk with Dr. Carson. And I tell you, he said that the reason why we have the problem in America with lack of affordable housing was the amount of red tape that the government has through the years, sort of implemented, that makes it next to impossible to build affordable housing. So these builders, they're spending so much money, with developing the land and putting in the infrastructure, which is, I agree, we do need infrastructure. I'm not saying that we shouldn't consider stormwater management, or we shouldn't consider, the impact to schools and things like that when we build community, and overcrowdedness, and things have to be planned. But my point is, to the builder, there's no benefit because of the cost to develop the land. There's no benefit to build a 1,500 or 1,600 square foot house or 1,000 square foot house. There's zero benefit. They want to build the biggest house that they can make the most amount of profit in on the smallest piece of land possible, right? So they cluster houses, and it's a problem, right? And as a result, 70% of our housing, and that's probably a conservative amount, is unaffordable to, the average working class American. And, so the problem is that, how do we get people to live in the communities where, you can't segregate and say poor people, lower income people have to live in a certain spot, because that's what's happened. right? So, what that's not, we have to find a way to give people that can't afford to, buy a 3,000 square foot house for $1 million or more. We have to make it available for them to live in the community, be where they would like to be, right? To have the inclusion to be where they want to be. And I think that accessory dwelling units is a great way to do this. And I think that, a lot of things about this, right? I think about the struggling local business. I think about the community impact of building the density in a rural area where we're losing our small business people. They can't keep the doors open. Just because they're in a rural area where they have a less of a population, and they have a convenience for the neighborhood. Maybe it's a hardware store. I know it's hard to imagine, but maybe it's a local restaurant or a pizza shop. We go by, we see them today, they're gone tomorrow. They didn't make it. So I think if we increase the density a little bit without changing structural components of the neighborhood, right? It still looks like a single family community neighborhood. It doesn't look commercialized. We increase the density. We only have 2 people living in the house. We allow 4 people now. We've got 2 different units. It helps that business, right? Tremendously, right? So I think, I agree. I think it's something that needs to be talked about. Cole, I know you're doing a fantastic job. You've been lobbying for this and, and writing a book on this and educating people on this before it was even cool, right? You've been at this for a while.
Yeah, Portland started to get into ADUs in a big way back in 2010. And that's kind of when I built this ADU and started to kind of put together a lot of educational material for homeowners who wanted to build them, because there wasn't anything available at that point for homeowners who wanted to do it. And it's a really complicated process, to be a developer if you've never done it before, on top of having a 9-to-5 job. Just the financing piece is complicated, let alone the construction management, let alone the permitting and design process. It's all quite complicated. So I kind of did a 1-day long class for homeowners that I started to teach, and I taught that class for a long time. And then I started to teach real estate professionals, and now I run this ADU specialist designation for practitioners across the country. The next event is going to be in Berkeley, California on October 20th. You can learn about that at ADUspecialist.org, and that's the event that Chris attended. So yeah, I've been at this for a while, and like I said, I think a lot of the work on the West Coast now is kind of bringing the practitioners up to speed on all the different nuances and best practices around design, financing, construction of ADUs, because they're kind of different than what a lot of practitioners are accustomed to doing, and real estate practitioners too. The East Coast is frankly quite far behind on the ADU front, and there's just not a lot of permitted ADUs being built yet because the codes aren't very good yet. And so I'm doing a lot of work on kind of the policy side of things, and advocacy side of things. And I think all that work is really important, that, in order to kind of continue getting these things built. Because they are, I do believe, I'm pretty mission driven on them. I think, from my vantage, the reason I'm interested in them is because this is one very small part of what needs to occur to address climate change. And so somebody needs to work on that. And so that's kind of my life's mission. But it's not the only thing that will solve climate change, but it's one thing that needs to happen in order for climate change to be addressed.
If I could say
Chris,
something.
Yeah. Go ahead, Chris. I was going to ask
no,
a question.
I was just going to say that it should be a balance on both sides. When you were talking about it getting, more than one ADU, and also from the regulatory side, what we want to get away from is so much red tape. And once you start getting those regulations and with ADUs, it'll actually end up stopping what the good that we're trying to do. And so when you look at, people bringing in regulations and people coming in with, oh, well, we don't want it done in this neighborhood, or we can't do this and we can't do that. we'll be right back to, where we've just come from. So we want to get to a point where it's a balance, where everybody really understands the real need for the ADU, not to get overly carried away in terms of a real estate investor just not caring and doesn't care where where he's going to lay his property and how he's going to do that. There should be a balance with that all the way around. That's all I wanted to say about that.
And Chris, look, and all three of us here, right? Melissa, I know, it's nothing that you've gotten into yet, but Cole, myself, Chris, we're real estate investors, right? We are, look, don't get me wrong. I'm coming at this from the way of, I know it needs to be regulated because it's going to be a problem if we don't, right? We need to make sure that we protect it, in my opinion, to owner occupants. I can look at it from a greed standpoint too. I can look at it from a standpoint, I don't want to, but that's what I'm afraid of. I don't want it to get to that point. I don't want to destroy the communities by allowing investors. We've got a problem with this. We've got a problem with people buying up all the affordable housing and not making it available to people that want to occupy a home and actually call it a home and set up roots and, do whatever it is that they want to do, right? And say that, look, I've got permanence of investment and I have a bought into a community. I think we need to preserve that. But Chris, let's talk about it from the construction side. So we have, and then we'll answer some more questions before we call it a night. But, obviously, there are different types of ADUs that you could build, right? You can take a garage and make that. We do it all the time. We finish garage space into living space, so it can be done. We can also take that attic area and make an ADU in the attic or a basement. And then we can also have a detached structure. There's size limitations. You can't have the ADU be bigger than the actual house so there are size restrictions. But from a homeowner standpoint, Chris, from somebody that is listening tonight that says, you know what, this could help me out. This could help me because I can get some income coming in. What would be the best way for them to go? What's the cheapest, most easiest way from a construction standpoint to convert their home into an ADU, have an accessory dwelling unit to their residence? What avenue should they be looking to do?
Yeah. This is a good question. Right outside of what you just mentioned about the garage, because that is legal. You can actually you have a foundation there. You can do those things to obviously bring it to a full-fledged ADU. That would be the cheapest way. In terms of cost, so we're actually going to be experimenting this actually. So I do what we call a stick build, which is we'll go down there and we have the layout. We can have that framed up and ready to go probably in 60 days, maybe even less. The other thing that could happen is that you can do it in a modular style. So a modular style is that, we'll come and do the necessary things that we have to do to bring the utilities to it. But basically it'll be set in one day, and we can get it set and they'll have the actual unit itself up. We'll go back in and finish that up. And that can happen in a very short period amount of time in doing that. As Cole mentioned earlier, he's talking about climate change. They have all kinds of different things that you can do, greenhouses and, the different container homes. I don't know a whole lot about those, but those certainly can act as ADU as well. So in terms of what you want, what your goal is as it relates to, energy saving or time or just the financing piece, because it's more than just the ADU. You had said something earlier, Todd, which is 100% true. In most cases, these places are going to have to be sprinkled. And so, we're talking about an old, water system. Most people have 3/4 inch lines and you're going to have to do 1.5 inches. And so now you have to go into the street and change that and bring that utility to the ADU. So the homeowner really needs to understand those pieces and the different things that go along with that. Your water, electricity is not a big deal as much as it is about the water, but you're talking about cost. You don't want to just say, hey, we can just build this ADU and leave out the most important part, which is that bringing the utilities back there. So we have a system that we break it all down, and we want to be able to come out, somewhere between 185 to 210, on a particular size, let's say 600 square foot ADU. So we're getting those things together and see how we can price them out and make it affordable. And in terms of the exciting part about this is that, so many opportunities, even for lenders, there's so many different things that people can do in order to get these houses, these ADUs financed. There are different ways to do it. A lot of times your retirees might have all the money. They just, hey, I just want to buy it outright. I see the good that's going to come out of this in 4 or 5 years or 6 or 7 years. I'll be able to get a return on my investment, and I'm happy. Well, other people are not in a position to do that. So oftentimes they might can refinance the property they have now, to pull some money out to be able to do that. That might be an option. But the most important thing is that it now leads the financial community to say, hey, we have different programs and options that you can do to be able to bring this asset to you, your property. So that's the exciting part. That's one of the things that I would mention in terms of, understand what their budget is and letting us be able to break it down to a point where we can see how this can work for you. Now, for instance, because I have rental properties already, the majority of the people that rent from me are companies. They're companies that have group homes or, like I said, assisted living homes. And so, literally, when I told the CEO of the company of the people that stayed in my residence, I told him about the ADU, and he looked at me in my face and said this. He says, "If you can build 1,000, I'll rent 1,000." That's how it was so serious, because they need housing so bad. And he said his sweet spot was a 2-bedroom, small kitchen. And can you imagine being able to go to a client and say, hey, not only we can build this, but we can bring the renter as well. That's something that this country needs. In addition to the housing, they also need some income. I mean, we're getting older. We don't want to be in a fixed income and then, we can't do anything else. But this is an investment, a growing investment, and it's legacy, because when they're gone, they can transfer it over to their children. So it's a lot of positive things that comes out of that.
Yeah, I know you were talking about. I mean, that's one of the things I liked about it. I mean, if you could put a whole package together where somebody that has an existing home, for a set amount of money, you can help them with the financing, do the construction, and then place a tenant. It's a turnkey. Turnkey operation. I would certainly, I look at it from, I can hope that, I would hope that you could build, a garage conversion for less than $300 a square foot, with already having the infrastructure. And I kind of wonder whether, I don't think that you're going to need, if you have a garage, a detached garage, and you can put in 600 to 1,000 square foot area in an attached garage, long as you can get the sewer connected, you need to put in a bathroom, right? So a simple 2-bedroom, 1 bath, right? Accessory dwelling unit. I mean, the big thing that you're going to have to do, you may have a power up, right? You might have to upgrade your power. Maybe you have 200 amp service and it's maxed out, or maybe there's a way of not upgrading the electric. And I would hope that you could certainly do something in the 600, for that, half that. I would think if somebody could build a 600 square foot ADU within their existing house for $90,000, that would be a no-brainer. It would be an instant income. It'd be a positive cash flow. And so my challenge to you is to get it to that point. Anyway, let's take some questions.
Mm-hmm. Cole, what are you hearing as far as pushback? Because we did have a question here. What are the people saying who do not support ADUs?
I mean, the fear around ADUs stems from the fact that there's kind of an intrinsic concentrated cost to housing development near you. And so people are afraid that there's going to be parking problems. People are afraid it's going to, quote unquote, change the character of the neighborhood that they live in. They're afraid they just don't want, more people living near them. That's kind of like the underlying fear around housing and around ADUs. And so, that's kind of the common kind of take against ADUs.
I know we briefly touched on parking, but let's bring this up. In a more congested area, especially being on the West Coast, where are the people living in these homes going to park? People will already park on the street because they use their garage for storage. Are you seeing any changes made within the towns or the cities to accommodate more parking?
So, I mean, so parking, like I have a pretty, different take on this question, perhaps than many people. But, I feel as though America in general has kind of an addiction to parking. Like the concept of we all feel like we need to have free parking, and it's a really big problem for the country. The way that we look at our relationship to our automobile and our parking entitlements is causing urban sprawl. It's causing housing costs to be dramatically more expensive. And so, yeah, I just came back from Portugal where nobody has cars. Like everybody gets around by train. And no, I'm saying everybody's going to get around by train or bus or walk or bike, because we can't do that in this country. But that's because of the way the country is being developed, because of the parking requirements, because when you build a house, you have to put in 3 to 4 parking spots. When you build an ADU, you have to put in 1 or 2 more. And with every kind of commercial development, you have to put in X number of parking spots. And this is what results in urban sprawl, and what results in us having an urban form that requires that we drive everywhere, because the lots are so big, because there's so much parking. There's much more parking and much more asphalt associated with vehicle habitat than there is associated with human habitat. So my perspective is that there should be no parking requirements for anything, commercial or residential, ADUs or otherwise, none. And that is very running afoul of the American ideology around parking. Most of us on this call presumably think that parking is a big problem, that we don't want it to be more difficult to park near us because there's already parking problems. But the data doesn't really back that up. There's been a lot of research on this, and the reality is there isn't a lot of parking problems in residential neighborhoods anywhere in this country, except for like some specific neighborhoods that are adjacent to commercial corridors. So in residential neighborhoods, there's really not a good argument to be made that there should be off-street parking requirements, but that is definitely running afoul of the way that things are currently in place. And certainly, in a more tactically speaking, I don't talk about that issue in general. But with ADUs, it's very important to not have off-street parking requirements, because if you require an off-street parking spot for an ADU, it becomes geometrically impossible to both fit an off-street parking spot and also a detached new construction building on the lot. Furthermore, it's quite expensive to add that off-street parking spot. So if you can do it, which is geometrically difficult to do, it's going to be really expensive. It's going to increase the cost of construction, which makes ADUs unaffordable, which is running afoul of what the problem that ADUs are intending to solve, which is trying to create more affordable housing generally. So geometrically, it's challenging. It's really expensive. And then on a mathematical level, if we look about the city in the country with the most permitted ADUs per capita or per for the number of homes is Portland, where I live. And there's and we've been at this for a long time. 2% of all of our homes now have ADUs. And so if you look at that another way, you could say 1 out of every 50 homes has an ADU. And that means that on a block or 2 blocks or 3 blocks that have 50 homes, there's 1 additional vehicle being added to the street in the city with the most permitted ADUs of any city in the country. So when you look at it that way, you got to say to yourself, are ADUs really going to cause a parking problem if we don't require off-street parking? And a developer would also understand, hey, there is a market need for parking. We might want to provide off-street parking. And oftentimes developers are savvy enough to say, our renters would like to have an off-street parking spot. So it might be a rational thing for a developer to add a parking spot, but sometimes they can't do it geometrically on that lot. And so to make that a requirement essentially kills ADUs, because it's so difficult to add that geometrical space on a lot when you're also adding a new building.
Chris, how are they handling it in DC? I mean, parking's a big problem in DC.
Yeah, parking is a big problem in DC. So even with the apartments and uh, the condos that they're bringing, they actually this is anything to do with the ADUs. They actually are saying that they can't have a car, and if they want to build this building or what have you, they cannot. All the tenants have to sign on a document that they do not have a car and will not be bringing in there. And that's one of the restrictions. Now, I'm not saying that's from everybody, but they are doing that. And then working with these developers and telling them, hey, you have to sign this affidavit that's saying that when you put this building here, that there won't be anybody here with cars. So as it relate to an ADU, again, it's just like in anything, when something is new, when the internet was new, we didn't know how to regulate certain things. It was just buck wild for anything. And then as we got to see, what was happening, then we were able to put some sort of regulation. And again, it goes back to putting a balance into, you're not going to get it. Nobody's going to get it 100% right. But at the end of the day, it's really just about being able to supply something that's a need, which is housing, and being able to do it the best efficient way as possible without, getting too many people in an uproar and those things. But this is the great thing about America. We learn about things. We try to bring a balance to it. We're not going to make everybody happy. I'm sure there's some people on this call right now that don't want to do not one ADU, So, and then you got some other ones that want to do 3 or 4 of them, So, the bottom line is that, we're continuing to evolve in real estate. We're continuing to evolve in how to handle these housing issues, and at the end of the day, and I'll speak to this part even with our youth. We're supposed to be kind of transferring the wealth, but a lot of them don't have the money that some of our parents have had, and I think it's a great opportunity that if someone gets a house and they want to put an ADU on it, or they purchase a home with the ADU that's there, because then it also brings them have at a young age to see the possibility of real estate investment, even on a property that they purchased for their first time home. So to me, it's just very interesting. The way the market is moving, we are super excited about ADUs. That's all I've been talking about. Todd, that personally, how, in my mind, how we are preparing to do this nationwide. This is huge. And, I don't think there's anything else out here as it relates to, I don't want to say easy money, but something very reasonable that all homeowners can be a part of.
So a question for you, Cole, and we'll kind of go ahead. What were you going to say?
I was just going to say, I just want to, augment what you just said, Chris. I think it's a really good point. Like, this is the reason that ADUs are so attractive to me is that it's a grassroots movement. It's a way that individual homeowners can help solve the housing affordability crisis. Right now, governments across the country who don't have good ADU regulations in effect are effectively preventing a grassroots form of solving the housing crisis, solving the climate crisis, solving the lack of accessible housing crisis, solving all of these problems, these social ills that could be solved with no money whatsoever if the government simply made it easy for us to do what the market wants to do. This is a movement that requires deregulation. It's a very attractive, compelling thing from both sides of the aisle. It's letting the market do its thing to solve all these social ills. And it's really just a matter of kind of getting those codes right in the right markets. ADUs will then flourish.
Yeah, so we'll close up here. We'll begin to wrap up. But Cole, I want to ask you because, when we talk about, and I know a lot of legislation, it seems as if is sort of, there are a lot of decisions that are being made without a whole lot of community impact. And, and I could point out specifics, but I won't. But will this be something that that people will have the opportunity to vote on? or as you're seeing the areas passing this legislation for ADUs, is it something that is involving the community, or they're just kind of sliding it right on through?
It's not voted on, no, but it's usually done at the city council level, and so there's like there's always a opportunity for public input at the city level in municipal kind of public policy processes, which are typically city council meetings or county hearing meetings. And then at the state level, it's in the legislative process of voting for the elected officials and participating in the rulemaking process. So it's happening in those two tracks. So it's a public process, but it's not something that's voted on.
Right. Yep.
Yeah.
So there you have it, guys. You have it from two experts, industry experts. Chris is, he's prepared to start building these like crazy here in Maryland and DC. I do think that they are pushing to have in our state, Maryland, all counties and the Baltimore to become approved for accessory dwelling units. It'd be interesting to see how it plays out. And but anyway, Cole, thank you so much, man, for being on again our Tuesday night podcast, sharing all your expertise. Any final parting thoughts?
Well, I'll just say it for homeowners who are interested in ADUs. Check out this book. I have a website as well, buildinganadu.com, where you can sign up for a web course. That's pretty extensive web course about building ADUs. And for practitioners, if you're a designer, builder, lender, entrepreneur, developer, consider coming to the next ADU Academy, which is going to be in Berkeley, California in October. And thanks so much for having me, and go out there and either build an ADU or advocate for ADUs or don't, but it's good to learn about them. They're pretty cool. And I am glad that you guys were all kind of here to learn more about them, because they are definitely a new thing that's going to be more and more in the news in the coming years. So good to learn about them on this podcast.
Yeah, absolutely. And Chris, I thank you, man, for spending your Tuesday evening with us supporting parting words.
I get one of the things I want to say is that I'm a specialist because of Cole. So now I'm an ADU specialist. But no, actually, I enjoyed the show tonight. I want everyone that was listening tonight to just consider what the whole conversation has gone on this platform that Todd has been holding up over the past few years, but specifically about what we talked about tonight with the ADUs. It's an awesome opportunity. Think about it. If you've never thought about it before, I think it's a good opportunity for you to consider having an ADU on your property. I think it's a good opportunity that if you know someone that wants to be an advocate for it, to connect with those people and let the governments hear your concerns and why it's so important that you want to be able to not just have any kind of housing, but have housing that will increase, Todd, you talked about, having, retails near you, that increase business, that makes a community a community. And so we should get excited about, being able to help the community. But at the end of the day, it'll bring in some income. So thanks, Todd, once again for having me. I had a great time tonight, and I look forward to any time you want to invite me. I'm always here for you.
All right. I appreciate that. Melissa?
Cole, thank you so much for being back on again. I know it'd been a little bit of time, I think almost 2 years since we had you before. So we'll have to have you back again and see the progress at that point. But thank you for sharing your knowledge tonight. And Chris, I feel your excitement. I know that you are so excited about these ADUs, and it's going to be really fun to see what happens in your future, especially with constructing them. And we're just going to have to video it again. Yes. So thank you both so much. And thank you, Todd.
All right. Well, thanks, guys. We appreciate you. We'll drop all of the links in the show notes. You can reach out to Chris if you're local here in Maryland. And if you're not, I'm sure he'll point you in the right direction, too. He knows people everywhere. It's Christopher Seymour. What can I say? And, guys, Cole Peterson, he is the pro. He's the expert. If you're interested, drop him a line, buy his book. Again, we'll put the links below. We appreciate you spending your Tuesday evenings with us. Guys, we're just trying to bring you all the latest and greatest what's happening in the real estate industry Until next week, if you haven't already subscribed to our channel, you can take a moment, do that now, smash that alert bell. You'll know every time we upload content just like this. Have a great night. See you next time.
See you next
All right,
time.
good night.